All right, welcome to Intellicide, another episode to find out who killed intelligence and common sense. I'm Anthony Gentry, and my co-host is Kyle Palmenville. Thank you for joining us today. As a matter of fact, please hit the subscribe and like button.
Yes.
So,
Yes, please
Kyle,
do.
we got a few topics on the plate today.
Yeah, this episode's probably like news of the day sort of thing.
Correct.
We're going to jump around a little bit, I think.
Yes, sir.
First thing I think we're going to talk about, because it kind of leads into like what our last episode was, we were talking about like entertainment and Marvel movies and all that. So the labor strikes, starting with like the writer's strike and the actor's strike, and now the auto strike and the server strike out in Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of labor, which this is some people are calling it the summer of labor.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what's your thoughts on why we are experiencing all of this labor?
I think it's way overdue. It's pretty obvious, if you look at a chart that shows the productivity versus wages over the last 30-40 years, you can see under Ronald Reagan there was a sharp change.
Mm-hmm.
And people's wages basically stagnated, and people have been making the same money for a long time. Prices have been doing nothing but go up.
Right.
It's a pressure cooker waiting to blow.
Right.
A lot of them, I like I said, I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner.
Yeah. One of the things, and I was talking to somebody about this. I went to the dollar store. I want to say it's Dollar Tree up the street. And I guess I was kind of surprised when she rung me up and it came out to I want to say it was $1.30 or something like that. And because now it's $1.25.
Right. Yeah. It's no longer. We're not called that because everything costs $1. It's because we take dollars. Yeah, that's it.
Right. And now I'm not gonna say, hey, I blew up, but it got me thinking because every article in here has risen. If you think percentage wise, that's a quarter of a percent, 25%, 25%.
Yeah.
So everything, and you go to McDonald's and you get something off the dollar menu. Same thing. It's not $1 anymore.
Right. But and this is where, in my opinion, I mean, I'll go right to the heart of the matter. The problem is under Reagan, they changed it, and the philosophy in American business has been what's called shareholder primacy.
Mm-hmm.
Where the idea is that in every decision the business makes, they're supposed to take the shareholders above everyone else. And really, the real diehards of this belief say that the shareholders are the only people that matter, and frankly those are the people who are running business over the last 30-40 years.
Right. Well, and I think as you say, is borne out in the results that we've seen.
The argument used to be, and I remember talking about this with friends 30-40 years ago, when we would talk about how things were changing and whether or not it was good for a company to only take shareholders into account. And I remember when they were starting this experiment, the idea was, oh, well, if you just trust the companies, then what's good for the customer will be good for the shareholders, right? Because why would a company poison its customers? What company would do that? That makes no sense. That was the argument. I remember my friends back in high school, and after high school, we'd sit around having these discussions. And I remember being, my more conservative friends would tell me this, it doesn't make sense for a company to do something like that. That why would they, poison their customers or do something immoral? If it's, if it's bad for the customers, it's going to hurt the bottom line, was their belief. That's shareholders, but it's proven out to be so wrong time and again.
We both lived through that MCI WorldCom scandal.
Oh yeah.
So and for those that don't know what that was, the company was basically doing things to inflate the stock price, and they were issuing, a lot of stock, and everything.
Mhm.
And when it got found out, of course they went bankrupt. Some people went to jail and everything, but
Yeah.
right,
But
that's one
here's
of
the
those
trick though,
things.
and this is where shareholder primacy gets to it, right?
Mhm,
So since the 80s, since Reagan, he legalized the idea of a stock buyback.
mhm.
You know what stock buyback is, right?
Yes,
Where a
yes,
company buys its own stock in order to
right,
inflate the price because you got
right.
less stock out there on the
Mhm,
market, and so each share is worth more. And
mhm,
they do this every year now. Ever since Reagan made it illegal, it used to be ever since the Great Depression. When in the Great Depression they passed a law making it illegal.
mhm,
Like that's speculation. You're manipulating your stock price artificially,
mhm,
and it's basically corrupt. It's a corrupt
mhm,
thing to do.
mhm,
Reagan was like, I don't see a problem, and he made it legal again. And ever since then, they've done that, and they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars year after year on stock buybacks. And that's the problem, right? Because if you believe shareholders are all that matter, then it makes more sense to take all that money, put it into driving the share price up instead of paying your workers a living wage. And so
mhm.
what we have now are where two of the largest employers in America, Walmart, um, I forgot the other one. I remember brain fart, but Walmart is one of the largest employers in America, and they're also one of the largest employers who have full-time employees that are also on public assistance.
Right.
Like that company itself, like that corporate welfare that we're paying through, we have to subsidize the food and everything that their employees need because they
Mhm,
won't pay them enough. And that's the whole reason they won't pay them enough is because they don't believe the employees matter as much as the shareholders. And so they take that money every year. And that's the thing about all these labor strikes that kills me is all these people who, the same people that I had those discussions with decades ago are the same people now who are saying like, oh, well, think of the corporations and, oh, if they give in to the labor unions, then they're going to go out of business. Like, are you crazy? Like, literally, they spent like just talking about like the big three alone. Like, it's a tiny percentage of what they've made in just profits. Like, even if they just meet the demands of
uh,
the union, like the full demand, and this is the thing, right? The honest truth about negotiating in these labor union strikes. The first rule of negotiation is you always ask for more than you're willing to settle for.
mhm,
So yeah, they come out of the gate and they ask for 40% raises
right.
because they're really willing to settle for 25,
Mhm.
right? That's how negotiation works. That's how it's, if you don't do that, I'm sorry, but you're not negotiating very intelligently. And all the people who are out there going, oh, they're asking for too much. It's like, you don't understand how negotiation works. Of course they ask for too much. That's the point.
Uh-huh. Right. Yeah. I
I mean, little children learn this at a young age. Intelligent little children learn this at a young age, right? Like if you ask for something crazy, then the normal thing you want doesn't sound so bad, you know?
mhm, right.
Hey, Dad, can I have $100 for a video game? No. Oh, well, then can I have $5 for this? You know? And I mean, that's negotiation 101.
Right.
So yeah, all these labor strikes and everything, yeah, that's the whole point is they come out of the gate, they ask for like a wish list, like
Mhm.
what would be pie in the sky dream. And because they know they're asking for more, then they're going to settle for what they really want, what they really need.
And you got to think too, because the thing that we've been hearing over the pandemic, the time of the pandemic, was that there was people didn't want to work, so there's a worker shortage. So of course
It's such nonsense. They didn't want to work for no money. They didn't want to work for wages that won't allow them to live
right. But
anymore.
I mean, and that's what I'm saying.
People are like, oh, why don't they want to work anymore? It's like, because there's no point to it. Even if they go in and work for you full time, they can't pay their rent. Why would they do that?
Right. So rent is up, rent prices are through the roof,
Yeah.
mortgages are through the roof,
Yeah.
interest rates are through the roof, and we just had the GDP numbers.
But you know what else is through the roof? And this is really the real key. Corporate profits are through the roof.
Yes, yes.
Profit. And this is where it gets back to shareholders, right? Like these companies are not hurting, right? Like and that's what they say, like traditionally in the past, right? Like corporate profits made up like maybe at the most 40% of inflation.
Mhm.
Nowadays, though, there was a study just came out the other day that basically reaffirmed that nowadays corporate profits make up about 60% of the inflation.
Mm. Wow.
It's corporate profits and the idea that they have to keep increasing year after year. And part of the biggest problem is all the mergers and acquisitions has
Mhm.
made it so that the parent companies of the companies that actually produce these things have to squeeze the companies that they own to produce greater profits. And that
Mhm.
squeezing makes them produce worse products, treat their employees worse, a laundry list of things that are just worse for every stakeholder except the shareholder. The
Right.
only party that benefits from that stuff is the shareholder. And even then, it's like squeezing water out of a sponge. Eventually, you just run out of water.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
nothing left to squeeze.
I,
And that's the problem right now is we're in the squeeze phase.
has anybody, if you haven't seen it, I suggest that you go out and watch the movie Other People's Money.
Hmm. I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, it's Danny DeVito plays someone that basically goes in and gets companies to liquidate his assets and
Oh,
sell it off for the shareholders,
oh,
etc.
okay, yeah, that's from like back in the 80s or 90s.
Correct. And
Yeah, yeah.
Gregory Peck is the owner or
Okay.
CEO of this company, and he's trying to persuade the shareholders, hey, we're a family, we can stick through this, we can come out stronger, better. And it kind of was the introduction of this environment that you were talking about, where where the shareholders are the main thing you want to focus on. And I'm
Right.
not saying that you can't, as a CEO of a company, you're the steward and you do want to do right by the code or the shareholders, but you also want to take care of everybody else, your employees, your
Mhm.
customers. um
Yeah. You want to hear an interesting factoid?
mhm.
I went down a rabbit hole. I actually should have written this down because I didn't really know what we were going to talk about today. But I went down a rabbit hole where I was looking up because I have an uncle who told me this, and I went down looking it up. The whole reason for shareholder primacy as a policy, because there's no law that actually states that you have to take the shareholders first. It's
Mhm.
all based on a legal decision that basically where they say there's a fiduciary responsibility of the company to think of the shareholders.
Mhm.
And that's been cited over and over to the point where now people think that it's the law. They think that, oh, well, the company has to do that because they have a fiduciary responsibility because that has been quoted over and over. If you
Mhm.
go back to the original origin of that quote, it was from a bankruptcy.
Uh-huh.
It was from a corporate bankruptcy where a company was going out of business, and the judge had basically said, in the bankruptcy, you have to think of the shareholders
Uh-huh.
because everybody else is pretty much at that point, everything else is going out of business. The employees are
Right.
laid off, everything else. All you've really got left are the shareholders. And so that's really the root of that thing. And what happened after that is some other activist judge basically cited that and said, oh, no,
Uh-huh.
no, for a running business in normal operations, you're supposed to only think of the shareholders. It's like that's not what the original judge meant.
Right.
And that's the
Okay.
problem with all of this really legislating from the bench, you know?
Understood. Understood. Yeah, and I mean, you could take things out of context too.
Yeah. And that's what they did. I mean, he took it out of context, applied it to normal operation of business.
Right.
That's been done long enough now that people think that's just how business is supposed to be run. And that is how they run. That is how they operate these days. And that's part of the problem. That's why we had to have these strikes.
Right.
You know, they, and honestly, I think it's a good thing because labor unions typically, whatever the labor unions win, becomes the floor for basically everybody else. You know what
Mhm.
I mean? Like the only reason we have weekends or vacations or things like that are because labor unions won those things for us. We didn't have those before labor unions won those.
Listen, and we're old enough that we can remember things were closed on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember, like, you didn't go to the grocery store on Sunday. It was closed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well,
you know,
I mean, I'm old enough that I remember before there was a grocery store and there was a meat guy or the vegetable, you basically had to go to the farmer's market or the meat butcher,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and then, it was a big deal when the
Right.
Farm Jack finally opened,
Right. Well, right. But I mean, you also think in one of our older co-workers, he would tell stories of right. You basically work Monday through Saturday.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you worked half a day on Saturday, and then you
Yeah.
got to do the rest of your whatever you needed to do on
Well, and
Saturday.
part of that goes back, and this is where there's a lot of anger, and this is where I think a lot of there's the billionaire class doesn't understand the amount of anger that's built up towards them in the regular workers, because
Mhm.
it has been decades and decades of being treated this way, where they literally take advantage of what used to be a compact between the employer and employee. It used to be way back in the day of Henry Ford, whatever. You come work for me, I'll pay you a living wage, and I'll pay you enough that you can retire. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like it used to be, it was kind of a post World War II, post Great Depression thing, because it was really FDR that brought the idea of that kind of social compact, to the fore, where like you have a right to live with dignity, as a
Mhm.
human being. You have a right to be, if you work full time, you have a right to be free from poverty, for Christ's
Right.
sake. That is,
Right.
a basic human thing,
Right.
and it really goes down to, and that's why he used to have these fireside chats where he would talk about these kinds of things in kind of philosophical ways. What's the point of a business?
Mhm.
Do businesses exist to serve the needs of society, or do we exist as humans as fodder for businesses
Right.
and their owners?
Mhm.
Because those are, you operate under one of those philosophies or another one. You
Right.
know, that shareholder primacy belief basically believes that everyone else is just fodder for businesses, their
Mhm.
owners. That literally, if they go about and they poison the water in Flint or the air in, wherever, and they cause cancer in people in a whole town or whatever, that's just, a train derails and it poisons an entire town in Ohio. Oh, well, that's okay because the shareholders are still all right,
Mhm.
you know, and that's what really matters, isn't it? Well, think of the shareholders, those poor it literally poisons the town and gives the town cancer. And they're like, oh, those poor shareholders, they lost a half a point or what, like, and part of the really corrupt and sick thing is, there used to be this compact where employer employee, there was kind of this idea that you're supposed to be loyal to your employer because they'll
Mhm.
take care of you, supposedly. Well, they
Right.
threw that out the window, but still expected you to be loyal.
Right. Yeah.
And it rankled on people for decades, where it's like, and then finally the pandemic happened and they were like, everybody can work from home. And it's part of the thing that really people noticed for decades is 20 years ago, they were like, they did this wave of outsourcing in IT where they came around and said, your job can be done from anywhere. We're sending it to India,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, well, my job can be done from anywhere. And then when India didn't pan out and the job came back, after the pandemic, they're like, but you said my job could be done from anywhere. Why do I need to be in an office? Especially when nowadays all you do is you drive to an office to sit on a Zoom call,
Uh-huh.
you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And that compact needs to change.
Yeah.
That's part of what they're rearranging. If you work in a job where you do actually physically need to go in somewhere and do things, then you should have an expectation, of safety and all the rest of that, livable wage. That I think that's all things that we need to revisit, as a society. They used to talk
Mhm.
about that stuff,
Oh well, yeah. I mean, we used to talk about a lot of things. Schools are different now. The conversations are different.
Yeah,
Uh, One of the things that we just learned from our pastor, he was talking about how, right, you're not supposed to talk about your wages to your coworkers.
mm-hmm.
One of the reasons, with that
Well,
is because if I'm making less than the person next to me, and we do the exact same job,
right, but
why
someone's
why
doing
am I
that,
making less?
right, and that's the whole thing. The people who say that are always the employers. That's who says you shouldn't talk about it. It's always, and I remember having an old boss of ours who specifically told me that. And I got in trouble before where we used to work because I was talking about it openly
Right.
at
Right.
work, and he pulled me aside into a conference room. It's like, you can't do that. And I'm like, why not?
Uh,
Because somebody's going to get mad. I'm like, oh, so you're saying someone is getting screwed? Don't say that.
yeah, yeah, I can attest that I was one of those getting screwed.
Well, I can admit I was too. You
Yeah.
know, I was, and it wasn't until years later when another one of our bosses pointed out to me how underpaid I was.
Mhm. Right.
You know, and that's the benefit. You know, you make that stuff transparent, and then you get rid of those kind of discrepancies. And the only
Mhm.
people that's bad for are the shareholders, because it
Right.
might cut into their profits. And that's the thing that really kills me, is it doesn't mean they're not going to get profits. It doesn't mean the business is going to go under. It just means they're going to make a little less than they might have otherwise.
Right.
That's really the trade-off. It's like everybody gets to have a living wage, be able to eat, be able to pay their bills. But that's too much to ask if the ownership class makes a little bit less.
Well,
And
right. I mean, it's one of those arguments of, how CEO pay has gone up, by leaps and bounds over the
because
last
they
30,
tied
40
it to the share price.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So
But
every time a CEO says it's okay to do stock buybacks, he's giving himself a raise. He's
think about
literally
it.
explicitly giving himself a pay raise.
Those CEOs are still getting paid, even if the stock price tanks and the company might have to, lay
Right.
off the people.
Yeah, because they get a contract. That's the whole
Right.
thing.
Hey,
And that's the whole
you're
thing
gonna get
about,
a golden parachute. We're gonna pay you $15 million just to walk out the door. You're so
right.
bad.
It's it's the value of a contract, right? It's like, why, if you don't do a job that's that niche and unique, where like the executive job where like they get to demand a contract, if you're everyday workers, then yeah, you have to collectively bargain for that contract.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the whole thing. It's like, yeah, you need a contract. Honestly, you need something in writing basically saying like, you know what, this is how,
Now you'll like this link I'm about to post.
uh-oh.
Yeah. CEO pay has skyrocketed 1,460% since 1978.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing, right? It all is tied together, right? It's like, because they believe shareholders are the only thing that's important, and because they tied CEO pay to share price, and they
right.
made manipulation of the stock price legal,
Yeah.
that's what's been happening. And that's the problem, is all the workers have fallen behind, and it's literally a pressure cake. So like when things happen, like when CEOs, like that whole OceanGate thing happened,
Mm-hmm.
right, and some people were getting upset, like, because so many people were joking about this horrible tragedy. It's like you got a billionaire who basically, you know it's there's the thing is, and people underestimated how little sympathy there is for billionaires out there.
Uh-huh.
And watching Elon Musk do what he's been doing with Twitter, there's some people who are,
Oh man.
know
Yeah. Yeah.
full of
Twitter.
shite and fraud for,
Hey, listen, man. As soon as you're able to, you better invite me to Blue Sky.
yeah, it says I still have to be a member for a little longer before I'll get any invites. I've been trying to like post and stuff, and chat with people to, I don't know if you like have to do a minimum number of posts or something, or be on there for X amount of time. It doesn't tell me. It says you have to be a member a little longer before you get it. So it seems like it's time based, but just in case, I've also been trying to like, post and be active and stuff. So hopefully I'll get that invite soon.
Okay.
But it is, I don't know that Blue Sky is going to take off either. And part of the reason for that is that it is behind a wall like that.
Well, yeah, and I think Twitter well, X as it's called now, has firmly established itself. The thing that I don't
so Twitter firmly established itself. Twitter became ubiquitous to the point where Twitter was embedded in everything. You could take a link to a tweet and embed it in almost any message board or other social media app, and the tweet would show up formatted and everything. Now you can't do that. And a lot of that goes back to when he changed the name of the company. He broke all of those plugins that people had made to integrate Twitter with everything, they don't work anymore. And one of the fixes is if you go in and you just change it from x.com back to twitter.com, that plugin works again.
Mm.
But that ubiquitousness is what made Twitter, I think, a big deal.
Well,
And
right,
that's part
but
of what
you
they're
know, in the use, the way that the people use that, they are just used to being on that app and communicating that way.
Mhm.
The thing that I think the moves that he's making, I think, will undermine its use. The latest one was he was thinking about implementing where new users can't uh, retweet something. They have
He
to
also
pay.
rolled out like more tiers of paid use.
Yeah, I think, you know, if he continues to implement things like that, people will start searching, whether it be Threads or, you know, some of these other social apps.
Yeah, I mean, whichever one gets enough people behind it to start developing and building integrations with everything
Mhm.
else. That's what made Twitter a big deal. It was integrated to everything. Like I said,
Yeah,
it was ubiquitous.
yeah. I
Um,
don't. I do agree with you that Blue Sky probably won't get as big, and I don't know why they decided to cap it the way that they did behind the wall like that.
well, so it goes there's it's the balancing act between like ease of use and security, right? Like
Mhm.
Twitter, when it was at its peak, was very ubiquitous. It was all over the place. It was super easy to use. I could open the app and I would see tweets from people on the other side of the world, and I would get like, and that was the great thing about it was you could see like news as it was happening.
Mhm.
The problem with it was it became a platform for extremists and racists and um, crazy people, violent extremists and stuff, because they couldn't moderate the content. And that's the balancing act. And I think Blue Sky is they're going high in security. They don't want the crazy people and the misinformation on their platform, but at the same time, it's not going to be as integrated or easy to use or open. And that's the same problem a lot of these other ones have, right? Like there's so many threads. The problem
Mhm.
with threads is, and this is the problem with mergers and acquisitions, right? Is that threads as a social media company needs to be a competitor to Facebook,
Mhm.
not part of Facebook. That's
Mhm.
why they won't make threads a big thing, because it's all they're trying to integrate threads into Facebook instead of making it a competitor. And that's the problem, is that they're not the same thing. They're different audiences, different uses.
Mhm.
They need to make a Twitter something. Somebody's going to come up and fill that space. They're going to fill that vacuum and create something that will, you know,
Yes.
I believe that that's typically what happens. When there's a need, someone will build it to fill that demand.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll see. I mean, somebody out there may be inventive enough, and you know, maybe they were let go from one of these other corporate jobs, and
Yeah.
you know, entrepreneurial enough to create something like that, and you know, free the masses. Uh,
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, that's if you believe social media has even been good for society at all.
well, I listen. I think social media is just reflective of society as a whole. So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
I don't think it does have the capability of being anonymous. Now, I will say that people who, you know, you don't know who you're really talking to, and they can
Yeah.
whatever they want to out there, and be free with their racism.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, and that's kind of the thing, right? It's like back when Al Gore, before the internet we really became, when it was still DARPANET and Al Gore was lobbying to make it public and make it the internet. He called it the information superhighway, right? Like what's going to happen is everybody's going to be able to communicate more easily and good ideas are going to flow and blah, blah, blah. But the problem was it became the misinformation superhighway, and the bad ideas flowed right along with the good. And what really
right,
happened with social media was that it allowed everybody to suddenly see and share their opinions with each other
right.
on a larger scale. And I think nobody was prepared for just how crazy and racist most people are. And that's the
Well,
problem. The general public is pretty out there. This is America, man. I mean, we really
well,
gave
it's not
people
just
like
America. I mean,
women
you
just
know,
got the
here
right to vote a couple of decades ago.
you are able to, where those individuals who had those views were isolated. in a certain region. Now with social
Now they
media,
get a platform.
right now, and not only do I have a platform, but I can connect with people who are not only other side of the country, but on the other side of the world.
Right.
And
Before the internet, Andrew Tate and Ben Shapiro would have been on soapboxes in a street corner.
Right. So, and that's one of the bad parts about that. But again, we're human and we can corrupt anything if we want to. We can create, inventive ways to kill our fellow man. You think we're not going to create an inventive way to corrupt social media?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and at the root of that, honestly, money comes down to the corrupting influence of money is really what ended up turning that into. Like way back, like you had pointed out, our original iteration of our podcast when we were audio only was GadgetCast.
Right.
One of the things I remember talking about way back in the day was when Google, I think, went and had their IPO, or Facebook, or one of the two. And I remember making the point way back then that the problem with a lot of these companies and with capitalism in general and the way that we practice it is that the idea is that not just that you have to make a profit every year, it's that you have to make more and more profit every year, right? That it's always got to be, and that drive ends up honestly hurting a lot of companies because they end up undermining what made them great in the first place in the drive to continually squeeze more and more profit out of that product. They end up breaking the product or hurting it in some way.
Right.
It happens in all sorts of industries until there's a reaction to it. Like car companies will make cars that explode until people, push back on it. They'll make and that's the whole thing here in America, because it's so libertarian in a way. We have food that's poison.
Listen,
a lot of chemicals and things in our food that they ban in Europe because it's known to be toxic.
Have you ever read the book Real Food, Fake Food?
No, but I've heard of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I actually started listening to it not too long ago. And the author really does it's by Larry Olmsted, Real Food, Fake Food. And he talks about, right, in this country where the Parmesan cheese that we buy, that's for the most part, that's not Parmesan cheese.
Not cheese.
No, it's not.
A lot of it.
Yeah, it's basically wood pulp.
Yeah.
So
especially you get like Parmesan cheese.
Dude, he talks about the history of cheese from Parma, Italy.
Yeah.
And the process that this cheese making process is hundreds, if not 1,000. It's a long time.
Right.
They've been making the cheese and been making it the same way.
Right.
So, right. I do agree with you that in this country we've allowed capitalism and the need to make a dollar.
Right. But not just a dollar. You have to make more and more dollars every year. And that's, I think, the real, it's okay. I have no problem with companies existing and making a profit. It's the idea that like you need to make more and more profit, even at the detriment of your customer or your product.
Yeah. Who knows what the answer is? Who knows what the solution is? One thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about the labor outrage, but we didn't talk about the writers' strike in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And I think it's over now, isn't it?
It is. They reached a deal.
Because, and you got to think that a lot of their outrage was because television has changed its model, and a lot of they offer streaming. They offer, shows over streaming or whatever. And the writers, weren't getting royalties and stuff from a lot of that content that was on those things. And we talked about this on past shows too. I'm kind of, I've reached my breaking point with a lot of the streaming.
Well, and it's to your point, the companies, some of the things that they asked for in their negotiations were like I said, you ask for more than you're willing to settle for. But if you could get those things, great. And some of the things they asked for was like an end to some of the really corrupt practices that they've been doing. Like if they rename a show, then right now they act like they don't have to pay royalties in the previous show because it's a different show, not a new season of the previous show. And they do that a lot in streaming, where it's like, oh, well, this isn't season 2 of the same show. This is, you know, that same show with a slightly different name, and therefore it's a different show. So, and they do that specifically to get around points in contracts, so they don't have to pay writers or whatnot from the previous season.
Right.
And that's one of the shady things that they had addressed in the original ask on the contract. And I think that's one of the things that actually got left on the table. But like, some of the points they did get was like, you know, the agreement that they weren't going to use AI to try to write, which really seems like a no-brainer, because honestly, if you've ever gotten an AI to try to write, like, I think they saw that that was never going to work. So yeah, but then they got like some royalty agreements for their streaming work. So they got a little bit, they're going to get a little more money for the work they do on streaming. And they got an agreement that they're not going to use AI to try to replace them all. Now the actors are still trying to do basically the same thing. And that's really, I think, where it's disturbing, is that the studios are really pushing back on the idea that they can't take your image and use it in perpetuity forever. They want to be able to take your image and use you in a image, which goes to like Disney wants to take Chris Evans' likeness and put him in Secret Wars 10 years from now, when the actor is like 60 or whatnot. But they want to use his likeness, and that's the whole thing, right? Like Harrison Ford allowed them to do it with his likeness for Indiana Jones, right? Like he was there and set, and he got to perform in it, and like he got paid for it. But like they want to be able to take that and do that. They want to make like another Indiana Jones with his same likeness, you know. But that's what the studios want to do, because that would be great for the shareholders.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah. All right. But I think we're out of time.
All right, sir. Well, hey, it was great talking to you.
Yes, absolutely. This has been fun.
Catch you all on the next episode. Again, please like and subscribe, and we hope to have you next time on another episode of Intellicide. Anthony Gentry, Kyle Palmerville, signing out.
Signing out.